Tim. Many of you have seen that Michael Moore has been here before. This is not his first time on Ask and Tell, but I am excited to welcome Simon for his first webinar. So I'm going to give a brief introduction about Simon and Michael. Then they're going to say their disclaimers for their company, and then we are going to get started. So like I said, we're welcoming back Dr. Michael Moore, PhD, who is a senior MSL and head of field medical training and development at Theranica USA. And he is joined by Dr. Simon Kim, PharmD, who's a senior MSL at Otsuka Pharmaceutical, development and commercialization. So both Dr. Moore and Dr. Kim have extensive experience as MSLs, and they'll be sharing their knowledge surrounding the final presentation during an MSL interview. I know this is a topic that has a lot of questions about it, so hopefully they're able to address those today. And additionally, they have joined together to create a company called Breakthrough MSL, where Dr. Moore is the CEO and Dr. Kim is the COO and CFO. So during this session, they'll be able to provide information on their company and how it can help aspiring MSLs reach their goal of landing their first MSL job. So now I would like to invite you guys to say any disclaimers you would like, and then we can jump right into the questions.
Sure. So I'll speak for Simon. We just wanted to say up front that all of the views, all of the opinions and perspectives that we're going to be sharing with you today come from solely just Simon and I. These are not representative of our respective companies, their employees, their affiliates, their directors. It's us here representing ourselves and just sharing some wisdom and some practical tips with y'all that we've seen firsthand at how it can be effective. So
Awesome. All right, so let's jump. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Concur, so that's on the recording. Thanks, everyone.
Great. All right, so now we are going to jump in this first part of the talk today. We're going to be focusing on the final presentation and some questions that you all have about that. So first, let's start with a broad 30,000-foot view question. What general practical advice do you recommend for MSL job interview candidates who have advanced to that final presentation stage?
This is a perfect way to start, I think. So 30,000-foot view. Everybody here should know that the MSL interview process is a multi-stage process. So we're assuming that you've already passed through all of these different interviews with the hiring manager, possibly an HR screener at the beginning, and then you're going to be talking to multiple people in the company. So we're assuming you've advanced past all of those stages, and now you've reached the final interview stage where you get to present on a scientific topic. The number one, and it's going to sound really simple and really straightforward, but this is something we see clients struggle with all the time, is you have to show genuine enthusiasm and pure unalloyed passion for the therapeutic area, the disease state, and if you have to present on the company's product or a product, you need to convey that enthusiasm and passion for the product as well. I think what happens is, from someone who's been there and who's gone through these interview presentations, when you're doing practice presentations with maybe a mentor, or when you get and you actually are live on site or maybe doing the virtual presentation, there's a crucible that you're in. And that crucible, I think, forces candidates to lose some of that passion because they are so worried and so concerned, rightfully so, that they're going to speak out of pocket, or they're going to say something wrong, or they're going to fumble over an explanation of a study design. Those are important considerations, but do not let that steal away from your genuine enthusiasm and passion for the topic. That is contagious, and that will always impress an interview committee when you convey it effectively, that this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I hope it's a topic that's near and dear to yours as well. Today, I'm going to be speaking about Alzheimer's disease. That's just giving you an off-the-cuff example. So that's one big practical tip. One other one that I'd like to share before I let Simon chime in is something that I did and I still continue to do, especially when I'm interviewing for an MSL role, maybe in a different therapeutic area that I have no expertise in, but I have an opportunity to interview for it, is I will always watch a key opinion leader or a thought leader's presentation online. So if I have to present on depression for a final MSL interview talk, you better believe I'm on YouTube searching for lectures and presentations that are given by bona fide thought leaders, and I'm listening to how they present. I'm listening to the jargon and the lingo that they're using to explain certain concepts. Let me give you a real world example. I was interviewing at a psychiatry company for an MSL role, and I had to present on depression. I didn't know anything about depression. And I remember watching a thought leader's YouTube lecture where they talked about this clinical rating scale called the Montgomery-Asberg Depression Rating Scale, the MADRS. As an outsider who didn't know anything about depression, if I wouldn't have watched that lecture, I wouldn't have picked up on little things that this presenter was doing. For example, when he explained the MADRS scale, the MADRS, he called it the MADRS scale. I had no idea that that was how you could say that term. So whenever I was presenting, I took those insights from that thought leader that I researched on to help inform how I deliver my presentation and how I want to speak to it whenever I get to that slide. Those are my two practical tips. Genuine enthusiasm and passion for the topic. It has to bleed through naturally and organically when you're presenting. And the second thing is watch a key opinion leader online present on the topic. What about you, Simon?
Yeah, great points. I think another topic or a point that we can share is this can be really uncomfortable for a lot of you, right? Especially if you've been in clinical roles or you've been in research roles where you haven't presented in front of a lot of people and you don't have as much experience or it's been a while, right? One thing that we always say is you need to have people watch you present, right? Whether it's your family, your friends, your colleagues, people you trust. I mean, it could be your mom who has no scientific background, right? I mean, that's actually a good. I mean, I know Mike, you would leverage that, right?
I do that, yeah.
So you need to be able to present to an audience who doesn't know what therapeutic area you're speaking about, and they need to be able to come out of that presentation and understand something, right? And this type of audience, especially the ones who don't have a therapeutic area knowledge or expertise, they're going to be the ones who can tell you that critical feedback of your tone, your mannerisms. Are you swaying? Are you looking off to the side? When you're explaining this, it's just mumbo jumbo. Like, can you break this down a little bit clearer so that, someone who's an English major will be able to understand this? And these are going to be your trusted people, right? Who can give you that fierce, harsh, real, blunt feedback. And hopefully you're not going to be offended, right? Another thing that you need to do is record yourself. I know we hate doing this. I hate doing. When I look at this recording, I'm going to look at myself and I'm going to be like, why does my voice sound like that? Why am I doing this or that? But this is critically important for you to be able to look and find yourself kind of slipping up on things that you didn't notice. Because as you're presenting, you're going to be in tunnel vision, right? You're focused on the content, you're focused on how you've practiced. But when you look at a recording of yourself, you'll be able to pick up on things that you just can't pick up live, right? So the other piece of advice, and I think this is even more critical, is you need to leverage your MSL mentor network to help you design the presentation, help you with your flow, and then most importantly, how you present that presentation. So hopefully throughout the interview process and throughout your networking of trying to get your first interviews, you're going to have talked to multiple MSLs, right? I mean, this is hopefully dozens at this point, right? Out of those MSLs that you've networked with, your goal is to have MSLs that you trust, who believe in you, who are going to be in your corner, and who actually want you to succeed. So that when this time comes for the final MSL presentation, you can leverage your MSL mentors to say, hey, I would love to do a mock interview with you. Hey, you know what? Can I send you this slide deck for you to just high level, even if you're not an expert in the therapeutic area, can you look over this? Does this look right for an MSL final presentation. This is critical, and we'll talk actually about a patient, or not a patient case, a client case, where this was critical in them landing their first MSL job. I think we have a question actually.
Which, feel free to ask whatever questions you guys want.
Yeah, you guys are giving great tips, and I was just wondering if like you had anybody who's gone through the process to look up to, or like see an example of a presentation that they made to see what exactly they're looking for. I imagine these presentations are online, and I was actually curious like how long they are, but just to like see how like the format goes and like the specifics on what to include. I was just curious.
Yes, and that's a great question. How do you pronounce your name?
My name is Shahad. Sorry, I forgot to introduce my name. I'm a PhD student at UT Health, San Antonio. Fourth year, so.
You're right down the road from me. I'm in Austin.
Yeah. I was listening earlier. I know where Pflugerville and all that is.
Oh, jeez. Wow. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
No, you're good.
And you said Shahad?
Yes, my name is Shahad.
Shahad. So great question. So this is why it's really tough. This is why I think we wanted to start with general like areas of practical advice, because when it comes to what does the actual presentation look like, it varies from company to company. If you're interviewing at, I'm just throwing out companies, Bristol Myers Squibb for an MSL role, what they're going to ask of you if you make it to the final MSL presentation, depending on what therapeutic area you're interviewing for at Bristol Myers Squibb, the specifications around the presentation can be completely different than if you're interviewing at Biogen. Every company is like a family, and they all have their different sort of rules. And okay, we don't text at the dinner table here. They all have that. So that's why the networking is going to be really important for you to get some type of information, or if you do make it to the final interview presentation, you're going to see, we can just give you some examples. So we had one client who had a role play scenario. So for his final presentation, his role play scenario was you have a one-on-one meeting with a national level KOL, and they need updated on the disease state and product portfolio. And it was that type of role play. So he had to design it like a presentation one-on-one, not to like a huge, mass audience of various clinicians. This was one-on-one, and it was with a national level KOL. So he had to design his presentation differently than another client of ours, who her company that she was interviewing with, they gave her an advisory committee statement around the disease state. So that is a completely different presentation. Sometimes they'll change how long the duration of the presentation and Q&A session are. Some of them, it could be a 15, 20-minute scientific presentation with 10 minutes of Q&A. Another company that you interview with, they could ask it for a 45-minute presentation with 20 minutes of Q&A. It all depends on the company. So sometimes the company will give the topic and the specifications, the role play scenario, if there is one. Other companies, they will keep it open-ended and say, choose your own adventure. You get to choose the topic, but you're going to be presenting for 30 minutes, and you're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A on whatever topic you choose.
And then some companies that we know of, they'll even give you a slide deck on their medication, their disease state, right? So it just can vary widely.
Before we take our next question, I just wanted to use this moment for a second to point out and shout out Simon, because Simon and Mike both really helped me get my current role at Otsuka, really encouraged me to make that move. And then Simon was really helping me during the interview process as well. So I think what they both just said is a really good point, that at every single company, this interview is going to be different and the presentation is going to be different. So that's where it's really good to try to make a relationship with a current MSL at that company, leverage that relationship, and ask them for some input and help if they're willing to give it on that final presentation. And that's what was helpful for me. I was able to talk to Simon and a previous employee as well, and they were able to give me input as to what that specific presentation would look like.
And now you're at one of the best homes in the
I love it.
industry.
I'm very happy.
I miss that company every day.
Yep. I do see we have another question from Matthew, so I want to make sure we take that.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, my question was actually like very pertinent to something Lindsay just talked about, and was about how a potential interviewee might go about anticipating what kind of interview that you're going to get from a particular company, right? So, Michael, you already mentioned that there's this can vary quite a bit, and what I was going to ask was what steps can we do to, I guess, get ahead of that and know how we should prepare for that particular situation. And it looks like Lindsay suggested already, build relationships with people who are already in the company. And I was going to ask, is it also appropriate to maybe ask are there hiring folks, what to expect? Is that appropriate or not?
So the first part is that's really the only way you can know, right? Sometimes I know that there's stuff on Reddit and there's stuff, all on the internet, but that could be outdated, right? That could be a year or two old. This is the one place where it's not illegal and it's actually preferred to have insider trading, right? Knowledge. So this is where you want to leverage the MSLs who are currently at that company, who've been through that process recently, or who are sitting on those panels themselves. They're going to be able to hopefully give you that insight. And then the other point was, I forget, Mike.
The other point was anticipating, right?
I asked whether it's at all appropriate to ask what kind of interview style it's going to be from for maybe the tier below the final interview, the interview stage where you give the presentation.
Yeah, we'll actually address this, but it's absolutely okay to do that, right? So if you're working through a recruiter, someone from the HR place, and you get a topic and you get some guidelines, you can come back and email them. Okay, well, what audience is this going to be presented to? Is this going to be a KOL audience? Is this going to be NPs, MDs? Is this going to be just to industry folks, right? You can definitely get those specifications, and that's totally okay. So, Mike, I think you have some more comments.
Yeah, and then Matthew, one other pointer that hasn't been highlighted is that we're assuming you've already gone through all the other preliminary interview stages. You should definitely, at some point when you're interviewing, when they say, Matthew, what questions do you have for me? You should ask about what are the next steps in the process, and, try to flesh out some details before in the interviewing stage. When you get to ask these questions, you could try to get some insight during the interviewing when you get an opportunity to ask your questions to the interviewer. So that's where you could get some insight as well about what that final presentation looks like. Does that make sense?
So this is leading us nicely into our second question, which is, how do you advise somebody if they're given the choice by their company about what topic to make their final presentation? Some companies provide you with a deck, like you said. Some companies say, present on a topic of your choosing. So how do you advise those situations?
Yeah, choose your own adventure. You choose it, and we're going to let you have that freedom. So I think generally the conventional wisdom, at least from my perspective, and every hiring manager I've always asked this question to, they all say, we all agree, the candidate should choose a topic that they are confident and comfortable presenting. But you have to know that this is a risk-reward game. This is a linear scale of risk and reward. The risk is, as you go further along, as you get closer to the wheelhouse of the company, like if you're so bold that you're going to say, out of all the topics I can present on, I'm going to choose this company's product and I'm going to present their phase 3 registrational pivotal data. That is a bold move because now you're in their wheelhouse. They know it better than you. There's no way you'll know it better than them. But the reward by doing a risky choice like that and assuming you have the support, you have MSL mentors who are there to back you, if you have that support and you can choose a topic that's in their wheelhouse and you knock it out of the park, you have a huge reward that you do not get or gain if you choose the safe, conservative topic, which maybe you're 100% confident on, but it has zero relevance to the company's therapeutic area.
Mhm.
That is the scale, is how close in proximity are you to that company's therapeutic area, disease state, product. The closer you get to it, the riskier it is, because they can really wreck you when it gets to the question and answer session of this. And you will always have a question and answer session. So, but if you have the right MSL support, if you have, say you're interviewing for a psychiatry MSL role and you have an ace up your sleeve, like a senior medical science liaison in psychiatry who can give you wisdom and can help you avoid pitfalls or even interpretations of the data. That is something that it's a case by case basis. So the key considerations for you if you get to that stage and they say, what presentation do you want, or you get to choose the topic, the things you got to think about is how much time do you have to prepare for it? Some companies want a quick turnaround. Sometimes, because of the vicissitudes of fate, that the company is kind of delaying a little bit the hiring process. So if you have more time, that's a huge factor. That can I cram all this information in and feel like I can confidently and credibly present it? Time is a factor, and your MSL support. Do you have the right advocates who have the right expertise to shepherd you through that gauntlet?
Yeah, and actually, to color this up a little bit, we wanted to bring in an anonymous case. So we have a case of a client that we're working with, and he got asked this question. We'll call him David. So David got asked, okay, so he was given the prompts, and the hiring manager basically said, you get to pick your adventure, pick the topic, pick whatever scenario you'd like. It doesn't necessarily have to be on our medication. That manager specifically put that in there on our email. What this candidate ended up doing was picking the topic on their newest drug in their indication, right? The reason why was because they had networked with people within that company who were current MSLs, and they felt confident that they had built a good enough relationship with those MSL mentors that they could do mock presentations, do Q&As with them, pick their brain on the structure, and ask them questions on things that they didn't understand, or that they were anticipating during the panel interview. So long story short, this candidate went into that presentation, knocked it out of the park. He was hit with some hard questions that he couldn't answer, right? Because again, that company, that panel, they know that area better than him. But because he had done the prep work and he had all that knowledge base with his mentors, he still knocked it out of the park. He had to say he didn't know on a couple questions, and we'll talk about that later. But long story short, he got an offer for the job. We're very happy for him. And the risk, the reward really paid off.
So it's case by case. Yeah. And so something hopefully that y'all are seeing is that it's more than just you knocking it out of the park and all the work that you're going into putting into preparing for it. Yeah, all of these things, you have to cover all of your bases, and the game that is set before you in the final presentation is you need to expect that they're going to ask you a question that there's no way you're going to know the answer to. There's no way. You don't read the clinical study reports for the medication. You don't have access to those. So they can hit you with any question that they theoretically know there's no way you're going to know the answer to this. They are going to do that intentionally to see how do you respond in the heat of the moment, in the crucible of the final presentation. Are you going to fabricate an answer and, whistle Dixie, or are you going to have the integrity to admit that you don't know and ask if they'd be interested in following up? So Just know that.
Also, just remember, sometimes the panel will ask you questions that they themselves don't know the answer to, right? They're gonna ask it in a way where it seems like they know the answer to this, but they're just curious if you know, right? So you got to just be prepared for that Q&A session.
All right.
So we got some questions.
All right. Whoever wants to hop on first.
So we had talked about how it's really crucial to make connections with MSLs that work within the company. Are you doing your homework and reaching out to those MSLs prior to like the interview process, or during the interview process, are you getting introduced to people that you're talking to? Because I assume the interview process, like, takes a few weeks, but I don't know if that's like enough to build a relationship. And also, what is the best way to introduce yourself and connect with an MSL that works with that company, and in not like a pushy way or like forcing something to happen, but like in a polite way?
Yeah.
So just wanted to get y'all's feedback on that.
Yeah. Simon, do you want to take this?
I'll start. So the first part of your question, is it before the interviews? It's during the interviews? All of the above. You need to be trying to connect with as many MSLs in that company all the time, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully, if you've done kind of your homework right, you'll have connected with someone prior to your even getting that first interview, and they will have helped you actually get that interview, right? The second point I think you're talking about is, how do you build a relationship with someone who you've maybe met like once or maybe once, right? This is basically what we say, it's practice for being an MSL, right? I talk to HCPs, KOLs, right? Sometimes I've only met them once and I haven't talked to them in like a year or two. But from that initial conversation, I've built enough credibility from my knowledge of the topic, my interest in them, my questions that I'm asking them, and then basically kind of the undertones of like building that relationship, that they remember me, they believe in me, right? And they're willing to meet up with me again. So this is all practice for how to build that relationship.
Yes. And just to shed some light on some of the other things, one area that we can provide real world feedback, we had a client who was already in the interview phase. So she had interviewed with the hiring manager, one-on-one, video call. And one of the questions she asked us was, hey, like, there were some people that I had reached out to who are MSLs in the therapeutic area at the company, but they never responded back with a date and time to meet. We had to coach this client on following up with those people that initially may have responded to the LinkedIn message, but they never solidified a date and time to actually hop on a phone call. So we had to coach this client who's already started the interview process. Follow up. This is how you can word the follow-up message. And because she did that, she followed up. The MSL apologized because something happened with their phone and immediately scheduled a date and time. So we coached her to follow up. She found that connection midway through the interview process, and that person helped her when it came to preparing for the final presentation. So there's little aspects to this, these nuances about, yeah, maybe you reach out to somebody, but if you're not following up, you are not showing the intangible skills that you need as an MSL. If I send 50 emails out to KOLs and I just say, well, none of them responded, does my company want to retain me as the MSL in the territory? If I'm like, that's good enough, I sent the emails, well, I don't want to bother them. I don't want to be burdensome. It's professional. People are busy. So you have to follow up. I just want to shed light on that nuance right there. Yeah. How important that is.
And as long as you're polite in your follow-ups, you'll notice that KOLs, there are so many people where they're just like, you know what? I'm so sorry. I saw that. I meant to respond to you, but thank you so much for following up. And then boom, that's when you get the follow-up. Or gosh, like, I didn't see that. My email wasn't working. Thank you, right?
Yeah. And to answer your last part of your question, how do you design the message? The principles are easy. You keep it short, you keep it sweet. Hi, my name is so and so. I'm really fascinated and passionate about making a transition to the MSL role. Would love to hop on a call with you to discuss how your journey's been and what life is like at AstraZeneca. You need to introduce yourself short and sweet. Don't speak like at length about your research background and all this other stuff. Who you are, you're passionate about the MSL role, and the purpose of the message is I would love to hop on a call with you to learn more. Uh, that's how you design the message. Like those are the principles. All right. Luan, I think if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, how's it going, guys?
Hey, how's it
That's
going?
good. That's great. Luan. Yeah, we have interacted before, Michael, a few times, but it was a long time ago.
Oh my
It's great to
gosh.
have both of you here. Really, really good. I just want to take a step back and ask actually two questions in one regarding number one, the hard questions and also the pitfalls. And I'm
Ooh.
asking this question from experience, unfortunately. I had an experience of going to the final round one of my interviews, and can only say I was roasted. And at
Oh,
some point, the questions got to me where, I said I don't know three times, and I was like, what else should I say now? So what happened to
yeah.
me? I end up falling into those pitfalls, which I learned afterwards. One thing that I did was actually really nice. I reached out to the interviewer and I said,
Beautiful.
"Can you tell me everything I did wrong?" She was on the phone with me for 45 minutes, and that was the best call I could ever had
Yes.
because it was amazing. She was the person on the other side, and she was really sincere. And she said, "This is why we didn't choose you. You were the final two."
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
anyhow, can you touch a little bit more on those hard questions? And secondly, in the segue, how not to fall into these pitfalls?
so great point, Luan, and thank you for sharing what your experience has been because I mean, yeah, not every I mean, I've done a final presentation for the first MSL role, which was a contract role, and it's like you prepare for it, but you can't always anticipate what questions are going to be asked for you. All you can do is learn from it. And the fact that the hiring manager was able to give you the time and the honest, direct feedback, you have to understand how rare that is.
Yeah.
It is rare that you actually hear feedback on
Right.
ways you can improve. So, okay, common pitfalls. This is a really good question. So, one of the biggest pitfalls when it comes to the presentation is there is no apparent story structure. And I know this isn't English class. So, talking about first act, middle act, third act, you know, you have to look at this as an exercise when you're giving the presentation. I think the central question that you need to be asking yourself is, what story do I want to tell about this topic? There's a background there's exposition to the story. Then there's something that is not right, what we in the industry call an area of unmet need. So that is
Right.
always constantly used in industry. So you have the background, there's an area of unmet need. And then you jump down the rabbit hole through the story about this is a new pharmacologic class of agents. It works completely differently than any of the other mainstay treatments that clinicians have used for the past 10 years. You already start fleshing out the story. You need to think about story structure. That's a common pitfall where instead clients, rather than approaching it like a story, are just approaching it like, well, I have to tell you about the disease and epidemiology background. I have to tell you about the prevalence. I have to tell you about how burdensome it is to the healthcare system. And you're just spewing facts, but facts do not make a great presenter. You need the facts, they're an ingredient to it, but it's how you are delivering and presenting those facts that shows and flexes your presentation ability that will impress an interview committee. So that's a big pitfall. No story structure. I talked about this at the beginning. You're so worried and you're so concerned because everybody's looking at you and this is the biggest opportunity you've ever landed
Yeah.
that you start getting in,
Pretty much.
you start being your own worst enemy, and the passion that you would typically have talking about it gets shadowed out by your fear about I'm going to say something wrong, or like it's really hard to explain the study design. You have to convey your enthusiasm and passion. You have to smile. There's so many clients who, when they present, they're just so like locked in that they're not even smiling at all during certain things. So those are some of the pitfalls. Simon, I'll let you take a few as well.
Yeah, and I think to kind of like, it's almost like pre-addressing your question, Luan, of how do you avoid potentially really challenging questions like that? If you are prepared, if you're showing enthusiasm, if you're confident during your presentation, that'll lower the guard of a lot of the panelists, and they'll say, you know what, this person, they rocked it out of the park. I'm gonna ask like one or two softball questions. That could happen. I'm not saying to expect it, but if you come out of the gate just confident, ready to go, you deliver a great presentation, you can potentially avoid some of those hard questions. Now, what happens when you do get those hard questions that you don't know the answer to, right? The biggest pitfall is do not fumble your way and talk yourself into a question. Don't guess. Don't say, and take like 5 minutes to just kind of talk yourself into a question. This is the pitfall that a lot of candidates will have, because the panelists, they're going to look at you as a potential MSL representing their company, right? You're representing the company. There's rules and regulations. There's compliance aspects. If you're in front of a KOL and they ask you a hard question and you guess or you give them a wrong answer, you're going to totally cut your credibility for not only your relationship, but potentially for your company's relationship with that KOL, because you guessed and you gave a wrong answer. The best way to address this is to have a canned response, right? You need to have this practiced and ready to go. An example is, Luan, thank you so much for that question. Unfortunately, during all my research and all my preparation for this presentation, that's something that I didn't come across. What I want to do is I want to be 100% accurate when I answer this question. Would it be all right if I follow up via email after this panel? And I just want to make sure I give you an accurate answer to your question. Something like that. Better can than what I just did, but you've got to have an answer that says, great question, be specific, I've done my research, I don't know, I'm going to follow up with you. And within that next day, for that thank you email, you follow up.
I have a question.
Guys. This is great.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to follow up because I didn't understand what you meant by something. I'm making lots of notes here, but you said you don't want to walk your way into another question. What did you mean by that?
I might have misspoke. You don't want to walk into an answer, right? So you don't
walk into an answer. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So like, say they're talking about the mechanism of action, and you're like, well, like I think it's like this and like that, and then even if you kind of like if you get to like a general understanding of it, you know what's going to happen? They're going to start probing you even more because you sat there and you kind of walked yourself into a decent answer.
Yeah. It's the knee-jerk reflex that you want to say something. And I've seen it during interviews where the person will, norepinephrine receptors. I mean, I think I remember seeing something about pro-cognitive effects, and you're just now imagine you are a national KOL. You are writing guidelines that other clinicians across the country are researching, and you get an opportunity to present to that person and their team, their medical team, and they ask you that question, and that's how you're going to address it. That's what the company is looking at the lens of you through. They're looking at the lens of, if they are with KOLs in their territory, can they be a confident, credible conduit of information to these influential leaders in medicine? Can I see Luan be at this major academic hospital presenting to the headache medicine team there or at the psychiatric clinic? Can I see him, going toe to toe and handling questions with grace and finesse? So the other aspect of this is, okay, so we're giving you the principle that you always say you do not know, and you find a professional, graceful way to have a canned response, so that you don't just say, I don't know that answer, I can look it up for you if you want. That's not great, right? So have a canned response, but you have to know that if you keep doing that in the interview with every question they're asking you, or even multiple questions, it's like taking an antidote, but the antidote loses power the more you take, like a law of diminishing return. So yes, it's the right thing to do. You really have no other choice if you don't know the answer. You can do there is like some skills possibly, but it's still not going to have that great of effect where you can kind of clarify the question. So the person asks you it and you can engage in a dialogue around, okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, Luan, you're asking about long-term effects that have been mediated by this class of agents. You can kind of do that, but again, you're going to have to ultimately admit that you don't know the answer. The more you do it, your capital is going down. Even though it's the right thing to do, that's why preparation will always shine through in the final MSL presentation. And I'm talking about preparation holistically. You autonomously studying the information, you autonomously practicing and recording yourself, you going out there and trying to build relationships with people at the company to get their insights, leveraging your MSL network and asking them, watching YouTube lectures. I'm hopefully getting the point across that this is all encompassing when I mean preparation for it. It's not just one thing. And well, I'm prepared. It should be an endless
I just
pursuit.
want to share a very quick personal story. Yesterday, I had a one-on-one meeting with a doctor very high up in Mass General Hospital, and he was really tough. And he asked me some really tough questions. But, so first and foremost, that goes to say, you're going to be asked tough questions as an MSL. So it's not, it's a skill that you're always going to have to work on. But I think, and I understand in an interview, there's of course nerves surrounding it, but I think getting asked a really tough question, I think it helps if you think of it as an opportunity to learn more. This doctor pointed out something that in this presentation I give all the time. I just hadn't thought super deeply about this one point. So, my first instinct is to feel, oh gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I don't know the answer to this. But instead I, like to say, thank you, Dr. So-and-so. That's a really interesting point you bring up. And I actually haven't thought about it in the way that you presented. I'm going to go look through my literature. I'm going to talk to my team and I'm going to get back to you with an answer because you brought up a really interesting point. So it's nerve-wracking, but it's an opportunity to learn. We're in science and medicine, right? There's always going to be things you don't know because things are always changing and becoming learned by the community. So it's nerve-wracking, definitely, but it happens in your real career as an MSL. So it's a good skill to continue to work on. And like Mike and Simon have both said, not to necessarily have a script, but think about how you could spin it in a way that's still positive and truthful, that you don't know the answer, but you'll go find the information for them.
That's an awesome story. So relatable. So relatable.
It was scary, but it happens.
Yeah, when you realize that you have your integrity and that you look at it that as an opportunity, it's all about perspective. Yeah, you kind of become bulletproof then. It's like, I can't know everything. I can't know every meta-analysis that's ever been published in the space, Oh.
Now,
Louisa,
before we move on, I think Louisa had a question, or did it get covered? I want to make sure we get to you.
I did, but I'm really enjoying the discussion, and I think it's a little bit sidelined from the presentation itself. And so I'd rather everyone get through the questions first, and then if there's time left over, I can ask mine. Thank you, though.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. So were there any other pitfalls that can happen in the MSL final presentation that you guys want to cover?
Yes. Simon, go ahead.
One, I think we've covered everything else, right? If I'm looking at this, definitely, but we want to move fast through this. Data dumping, trying to read every piece of information on the slide, right? And it's, so here's the thing. When you're preparing for this presentation, of course, when you're creating your slide deck, you want at least amount of necessary words as possible. But sometimes it's unavoidable, right? Maybe there's a study design that's very intricate, or there's 15 or 20 secondary endpoints, right? You can still put a lot of words on a slide, but if you're sitting there data dumping and reading through each line and each endpoint, you're going to tank, because it's like the panel is going to just basically stop thinking. They won't even be able to to focus on your presentation. So we've got a good example of this. And I think Mike, yeah, that's all you.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a client, let's just call her Esther. And so whenever she did her mock presentation, so she presented it just like she wanted to do to the final interview, but she did it to Simon and I. One thing was I noticed her tone was she was almost out of breath from speaking because she was trying to read verbatim all the information that is listed on the slide. And I get the intent. The intent is you want to be thorough, but that is not a masterful presenter. A presenter is like a quarterback who knows that this safety is going to be blitzing, and so I'm going to call a go route to them because there's going to be no deep coverage. They are seeing the whole field, and so whenever you are presenting a really complicated slide, MSLs who are the high skilled presenters are always quarterbacking the slide. They're always saying, I know there's a lot of information on this. These are all the patient demographics and the breakdown of the disease characteristics in this clinical trial. What I want to specifically call your attention to is look at the percentage of patients who had previously tried this class of medications. There was around 1/3 of patients in this trial who were enrolled who were on this previous medication. You're quarterbacking and showing and leading the audience of where you want to present to, rather than the knee-jerk reflex of trying to present every piece of information that's on the slide. That is a pitfall. Do not do that. Make it your own.
And this is going to be a display of how much of an expert you are in the therapeutic area too. So when you have slides with a lot of data like that, if you, being an expert in the therapeutic area, can say, call out the things that are actually important to that therapeutic area, where the panelists will know, yep, this person, this candidate, they know what's important. This what demographic is important for this disease state. That's going to be very important.
And last point to this, if you know the company really well and you know their corporate values, and their corporate values are anything patient-centric, which is a common one at companies, if you can find ways to tie a message in the presentation and align it with the company's corporate values, that is a huge opportunity. So say you're interviewing for a company, one of their corporate values is we're patient-centric at this company, and you're presenting the clinical trial for their drug, and you're saying, oh, well, the average age of a patient in this trial was 40 years old. But you can see here in the demographics that the age that they were at diagnosis was 21. That means these patients, the average patient in this clinical trial, has been dealing with this illness for 19 years, which really underscores why we need a more innovative, effective approach to targeting these patients, because you're finding something in the demographics that's a story point that aligns with the company's corporate values. If you can do that as many times, and if the company prides itself on scientific innovation, then really nerd out on the mechanism of action and the pathophysiology. That's where you should be able to shine. That's just one point I wanted to throw out there.
I just want to do a quick time check for Mike and Simon. Do you guys have a hard out at the hour?
I don't.
I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just in case we go over a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, overtime.
So our next question is, what are hiring managers and interview committees assessing candidates on during that final MSL presentation? And what are specific things that candidates can do to impress them?
Yeah, I think this is good. So I'll take the first couple. We've actually talked a lot about this already. So the first one is definitely the candidates who've prepared, done their practice, talked to MSLs, and deliver that presentation in a way that really stands out. That's what's going to impress the hiring manager. Here's some context too. So whenever a final MSL interview is happening, right? So let's say you've gotten to the panel interview, a pretty common standard of practice for companies is to, let's say you have 3 candidates who are going to advance to the final round. Common standard of practice is for that HR recruiter to hold all the emails and send them off at the exact same time to all the final panelists, so that everybody has the same exact time to review, prepare, and practice their presentation. So knowing that means that your competition hopefully will have had exactly the same amount of time and constraints. And therefore, if you can convey that you are the most prepared out of that pool, that will help you shine. The other thing is definitely confidence and credibility. We've talked about it ad nauseum, so I don't really want to talk too much more about it.
And then some of the other things that impress, in my estimation, a skilled presenter is somebody, I just came up with this term. I think of like a good presenter as having educational bridges to the audience. They're using analogies, metaphors, similes, all of these, again, things that we learned in English class that highlight and underscore a story. So one thing that you can do to impress an interview committee is one thing that they're always assessing you on is, does this person make the data come to life? Is this person skilled at translating this large study design schematic and presenting it in a way that makes it accessible? And if you can use educational bridges like analogies and metaphors to underscore and highlight a theme in the presentation, that impresses people. It impresses people because you're making it accessible to them. And you're also, as an educator, you're really doubling down to make sure that they understand this concept. So you can do this in a lot of different ways, coming up with analogies and metaphors. It's like, it's a common thing of like when you think about a concept in a study or in a disease state, all you're doing is you're thinking about what is the theme? What is the message in this? One example is in headache medicine, there's a secondary headache disorder called medication overuse headache. Patients who experience medication overuse headache are taking their acute medications to abort a migraine attack. They're taking it way too frequently. And taking it too frequently over time will increase their headache frequency month to month. Now you're having more and more headaches. So what is the theme? When I was doing a final presentation on that, I was thinking, I boiled it down to, okay, a patient is taking too much of an acute medication, and that's having a bad outcome because now they have this diagnosable condition called medication overuse headache. So the patient's intent is good, but their outcome is bad or poor. What can I think of in real life where a person's intent is good, but it leads to a bad outcome? And it just came to me. I'm like, what about throwing water on a grease fire? If anybody's ever thrown water on a grease fire, you know that your intent was good. You wanted to put out the fire, but you just made the situation a whole lot worse. That is the logical thought process of trying to connect something, a concept that's in the presentation. Maybe it's the pathophysiology, maybe it's something about the clinical trial. But you think about the concept, you think about boil it down to its theme, and then just think of something that's relatable that hits those points in the theme. If you can do that, that always impresses the interview committee. The caveat is do not do it too frequently, because then it becomes gimmicky. So it's the Goldilocks analogy. You want to do it strategically in certain points of your presentation where you have a big reward, that you just explained this pathophysiology so well, and then you just stamped it. You stamped it with an awesome metaphor that really hit it home. Find opportune moments to do that. The last thing that I already said is your general goal in the presentation is if you can make this dry information if you can make it come to life in any way possible, if you can make it realistic in the life and eyes of a patient. The example that I already gave is a perfect example of it. Whenever you look at disease demographics and you say the average patient in this clinical trial was 40 years old, but the age that they were diagnosed was 21, if you don't take that extra step and connect the dots of that means for 19 years, these patients have been dealing and trying to live with this illness. And yet they're still showing up to be involved in this clinical trial because they need help. That is just an example of how you connect facts and you translate it to having an actual impact and making it accessible to your audience. Those are the big things that impress the interview committee. I love talking about this stuff.
Does anybody have any questions about that? About the panel, what they might be looking for?
Anything. We're here to answer your guys' questions.
If not, we can move on to a little bit about breakthrough MSL, but I'll give you guys a second if you do have a question.
Very quickly, and I know this is quite common question as well. You know that the people on the other side understand the pathophysiology. You know, they understand the disease perhaps better than you do. How much do you dive into these topics? Because you also want to show them you know it, but you don't want to spend too much time in your presentation doing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. It's really a time allocation battle or time management battle. You have to research it. Sometimes you're going to have to develop your own presentation. So you're going to have to create the slides, and then you're going to have time to practice it so that it's smooth and organic and that, yes, I'm using the metaphor perfectly right here. I'm going to make sure I do that. It's a time management question. And it depends on how much time you have to prepare for it. Simon, what are your thoughts?
And again, this goes back to the question of you not wanting to not say something, right? So you've done all the research on the pathophysiology or the mechanism of action, and as candidates in this interview process, you get self-conscious, right? And you want to say, well, I want to tell you everything that I know. I want you to know that I know nitty-gritty details about this, right? But a masterful presenter will boil it down into the very important pieces of that. And then the committee then can come back and say, hey, I know that you mentioned that the mechanism of action is this is an antagonist in the mediator pathway. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? And that's when you can come in and really go into the details. But during your presentation, you need to focus on the story, hitting the high points of whatever you're explaining, and then be prepared for questions.
And then I'll just add on, Luan. My approach typically is I will always, like whenever I'm researching a therapeutic area that I'm not familiar with, I'll always start with a systematic review. Find a good, recent, modern, systematic review, and that will have a compilation of a lot of different studies that will help save you time. That's probably the best piece of advice around where to start, because that brings it all together. It'll cite a multitude of studies, and then you can go down your own respective rabbit holes with each study.
All right. So now let's transition just for a couple minutes into breakthrough MSL. So what led you guys to creating your own MSL consulting company?
Well, so that's a great question. I think Ask and Tell with MSLs is actually a big factor in why I started a business, was because I did that first one in 2021, Lindsay. You remember that back in the heyday?
Yeah.
I did that, and I still get a lot of people reaching out for mentorship because they've seen that interview or that webinar. So Ask and Tell definitely played a big role in, there's basically the simplest answer is that I've been mentoring people for free for the past 5 years, from 2018 to about 2023. And there just is too many people. There's too many people and not enough free time in my life. And so the business was the most elegant solution to that, because now I'm not spreading myself too thin where I want to help this candidate who has my mentorship and I want to help them on their interview process. But this other candidate has also asked me to help them get an interview. So this company has allowed me to prioritize my work-life balance. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. So how can you explain a little bit more how you help paid clients navigate their journey to their first MSL role in the industry?
Yeah, so the big things for us is we really consider this, like if you were to get consultation hours, right? Purchase consultation hours, we really consider this a collaborative process, and it's very personalized to your needs, right? Each candidate, each client, their journey and what barriers they're facing are very different from another candidate, right? So, for example, I think a big part of why Mike and I are in the business together is because he's a PhD. I'm a PharmD, right? We get different perspectives and we understand what gaps certain clients have, right? We also really consider this collaborative. Mike and I, we've got plenty of experience coaching people on what to expect for the interviews, what types of questions to expect, what types of questions to ask interviewers, how to write up thank you emails, what the overall process is, like mock interviews, mock final presentations. But we call it collaborative because ultimately you, as a client, you have to put in the hard work, right? You've got to do the research. You've got to do the preparation. We're going to be here to fine tune you and to sharpen you so that you're the most prepared that you can possibly be. But ultimately, it is a collaboration. The other thing is, when Mike and I were kind of sitting down and thinking about, like what types of true barriers do candidates have, based on our past experiences, mentoring. So we came up with three. So the first barrier to your MSL, landing that first MSL role is number one, landing that first interview, right? The second barrier is once you've gotten to that first interview and you're progressing, how to advance deeper into the interview process itself. And then number three is definitely acing that final presentation in the interview. And we basically take it as a client by client, step-by-step process. We say, we try to understand your needs. We say, what barrier are you struggling with? Where have you gone to, and where can we help?
Yeah. And then the last thing in terms that whenever we designed this business, we wanted to prioritize our clients. So whenever the client decides to take the collaborative journey with us, one thing that we offer is, as a paid client, you have what I like to term as immersive mentorship. This is 24/7 access that you can use Simon and I as your sounding board for the multitude of decisions that you're going to have to make. Should I send this follow-up email to this HR contact? Well, what should I do? How should I write that email? What questions should I ask the interview panel? What are ways that I could ask better questions that are more incisive, that will impress people rather than just be a C plus level question? So this immersive mentorship is at every stage of your journey as a paid client. You can use Simon and I as your sounding board to help guide you on these infinite level of decisions that you're going to have to make. Of how do I approach this person? Hey, guess what? I finally got an MSL to reach out to me and hop on a call with me. And what questions should I ask them to help me on the interview process? You can use us. That's the immersive mentorship portion of this. So we wanted to be able to devote our time to the clients who want to engage in this journey with us. And we wanted to be there for you because we know how many, forks in the road that get put in front of you on, well, I could do it this way or I could do it this way. What do you guys think? Mm-hmm. We'll always be there. So with the immersive mentorship. So that's something that we want in our business.
Now, what made you guys choose the name Breakthrough MSL?
Breakthrough. So I'm a word nerd. I'm a huge word nerd. So I liked that breakthrough has two different meanings. Number one, it can be a noun for a really important, critical discovery. And the people that I've helped mentor have shared that the valuable insights that we are providing them are things that are completely things that they never would have thought of. So these are discoveries that they're having about, oh my gosh, I never thought to follow up with this person. I thought that was burdensome. Or I thought this question to this hiring manager was a good question. Well, when they see us work on how to level and optimize those things so that every part of their candidacy is impressive, it's a breakthrough sort of, revelation. And then obviously, when you're trying to make the journey into industry, as I can empathize with, back in 2017 and 2018, that's exactly where I was. That's why I'm passionate about this. You are trying to break through barriers to get into industry. And like Simon expounded upon, you have three major barriers: getting your first interview, advancing further into the interview process, and knocking that final presentation out of the park. So yeah, you have to break through all those barriers. So I love the double entendre of breakthrough, how it means two different things.
I feel like it's a phrase that everyone has probably heard on this call, that breaking into your first MSL role is the hardest thing to do. So I think it's a very relevant name for what everyone will go through.
Indeed.
Yeah. So where can everybody find more information about Breakthrough and your guys' services to determine if it's something that works for them?
Sure. So I am going to drop into the chat our website. I'm sure many of you already follow Mike on Instagram, and then we're also on YouTube. So
Sorry, Simon, I just did your job.
All right, Luan.
There we go.
There you go.
You need initiative. That's an intangible skill as an MSL.
Being proactive. Good job.
Yes.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
And I take credit for all the people that follow you on Instagram, by the way, Mike.
Oh, geez.
I send people to follow. You want to know what life as an MSL adventurer looks like? Go follow Dr. Kareem Mike.
Yeah.
She's got it.
Yeah, and then I had to finally, and thank you, Mary. That seriously, so much thank you to you. But yeah, it's like, just if you want a glimpse into the life, yeah. I'm not always like having fun on these business trips, but I do try to find an opportunity to at least check out the hotel pool. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Good for you, Mike, because I stay in my hotel like 95% of the time. I'm the worst at finding new experiences like that.
Yeah. This is why it's a happy marriage with Simon and I. We have these complementary personalities and backgrounds.
Yep. Well, I encourage you guys to all check it out, determine if it's something that's right for you. Are there any last questions for Mike and Simon before we close out this discussion?
Please hit us with it. Go ahead.
I'd just like
Derek.
to say something that that just for as an endorsement for these guys. If they're so I'm a recruiter, and so that's how I know them. But I talk to people all the time who are utilizing some kind of coaching or training, or they paid for like a whole thing. And the people that I'm talking to, these are the guys. This is who is giving them the absolute best information and support and bang for their buck. So that's just my 2 cents.
Wow. If you guys don't know Mary, that is like one of the highest compliments that someone like Mary could give, because she works with, you are the cream of the crop in your business, and you work with thousands of people, right? Actually, Mary got me one of my first interviews back in the day, and so well connected.
And Mary's being humble. She said that she's a recruiter. She forgot the qualifier, a phenomenal recruiter. Phenomenal. So yes, hit us with your questions, y'all. What do you want to know?
First, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Mike and Lindsay and Simon, for presenting. This is a great presentation. Good information. But yeah, I kind of want to ask, this is kind of like your last sales pitch, what makes your program a little bit different from the other emerging MSL breakthrough type of programs? The reason why I asked that is, I've been a pharmacist for 10 years on the clinical side.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people, and Simon, you probably seen this, a lot of PharmDs, pharmacists are transitioning. I see the roles of MSL, not just in MSL, med affairs are expanding so much where us in the clinical side are like, what is going on? Like, what are all these things?
Yeah.
And, long story short, I popped into one of Michael's videos. And I think one of the reasons you said is, I was tired of the 9 to 5, everyday, predictable type of job, right? And
Yeah.
that's what gets most of us like, yeah, we need to get out, right? And let's be honest with the numbers, the salaries of a pharmacist, it hasn't really changed in the past 10 years I've been working, right?
Yeah.
So my question is this, because it is a big investment for us, right? We have
Yeah.
student loans, we do a lot of stuff. There's so many programs out of there. And I've been going through I went through so many intros, people me promising me this and that. I get very skeptical. What makes your program stand out? Okay, because I hear that, yes, you guys personalize it. I like that because I jump into these programs, it's like you have to go into a 12 course, but there's no one-on-one. It's not personalized. There's no flexibility. But what makes your program, I guess, kind of like your sales pitch, what makes your program that would make someone like me, who's been a pharmacist for 10 years, before I commit $1 to $3 to $5,000 to something that, something that hasn't really been existent when we were pharmacy students, right? We had school counselors, career counselors, but what makes this program something that would be unique and different from the other programs?
It's simple as this. There's a lot, but I'll boil it down. You have 2 active leading MSLs who are your aces up your sleeve. That's the sales pitch. You have us in your corner, whispering, shouting, you need to send this follow-up email. You have us shouting in your ear, personalized, surgical, actionable advice, not general, oh, you should be doing this like this, if not. No, we're going to give you personalized, specific, actionable things that you need to be doing to cover your bases. But I'll let Simon chime in for what his sales pitch is.
Yeah. Well, I think for those of you who've followed and talked to Mike before, and especially on these types of like webinars and recordings, the biggest piece of feedback that we get from folks who end up being our clients is, gosh, Mike, I've watched you on a webinar. I've watched dozens of other people talking about the role. You're the only one who gives specific, actionable advice on these webinars. And that's what we bring in our consultations, right? We don't give you general cookie cutter advice that anyone who goes into ChatGPT could give you. This is our job to give you specific surgical advice.
The other aspect of it is no program, I don't care what the program is can guarantee that you're going to get the job. And we don't guarantee that either. What you are buying with our consultation service is you're buying peace of mind that you did everything you possibly could to play your hand that you were dealt the best way that you possibly could. That's what you're buying. Well, I went to this interview and I didn't get advanced. Maybe that was because the candidate pool was really competitive. Maybe it was because you dropped the ball when they said, "What questions do you have for me?" Maybe you thought that they were great questions, or maybe your interview answers you thought was a great answer to why you want to be an MSL. But what Simon and I uncover a lot is a lot of candidates have self-defeating blind spots. There are things that they are doing that they're not even consciously aware of that they're doing, or they said an answer that revealed that they don't understand the MSL role to a degree. That is the value of having 2 active leading MSLs who are in your corner and aces up your sleeve. The other thing is when you go into an interview, number 1, you need to assume that there are people like me interviewing for that exact same MSL role. You have to assume that. There is way too much movement in the pharma and biotech industry that when somebody, with the MSL role that you're trying to break through and land, there is somebody like me who has 6 years of MSL experience and is a leading MSL who, whenever I get asked the questions that they're going to be asking you, I'm going to be knocking those questions out of the park. Can you answer those questions about the MSL role and how you're going to approach it and how you're going to build your territory and what happens if you have KOLs that are not accessible to you? Are you going to be able to answer those to a degree that's convincing enough that you can compete with somebody like me on the interview? That is the game that you're up against because these roles are that insanely competitive. So if you feel like you cannot answer a question about the MSL profession as well as Simon and I could, that is the value that we're giving you because you're going to answer the questions as well as we do because we're going to tell you how to answer the questions and we're going to prep you on anticipating all these other types of questions. Now, we can't anticipate every single detail, right? But we are going to cover all the potential bases and, again, put you in a position to succeed. You're going to be the best possible and most prepared person for that interview, more than you would without us. It's a great question, though, Derek. All right, Luisa, you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate both of you, Michael and Simon, being here. Mary, thank you for the backing as well. It's very encouraging to hear the collaborations, not just with you guys, but also outside. So I really appreciate everyone's perspective. I guess my question kind of got brought up because of Lindsay's story and also Michael and Simon, how you guys mentioned that you had a candidate who was asking like, oh, they didn't set the time and you guys reminded them, you can actually follow up and figure out what's going on. And you kind of hit on it a little bit right now by mentioning sometimes you don't have people who are accessible. And so I'm thinking, it's great to work on the presentation, but do they ever do a role play where you're supposed to be presenting to someone who maybe is giving you a hard time with not giving you their time or not necessarily being open to hearing what you have to say? And so I'm curious, is that something you guys role play on? Is that something that's come up, which I'm sure probably has happened at some point? And how do you handle that?
That is a great question.
And sorry if we go over time. It can be answered at a different time if
Oh, no.
we're kind of short on time. So thank you.
We can answer
This is good. This is good. So, I mean, that's always a possibility. And then also, you got to consider when you're doing these interviews, the range of companies and their styles of interviewing are completely different, right? Some companies, like you'll walk it out of that interview and it's like, it's known in the industry that these people grill you. They sit there and they try to test you. They ask you questions they know you don't know the answer to. They give you a hard time. I was given a hard time with my interviews. And, you just got to you got to prepare for that. On the other hand, there are going to be companies where they want you to do a presentation, ask some questions, kind of check the box. So it just really, really depends on the company that you're going for. How you prepare for them is, or how you deal with that and how you do your prep is just going to doing a mock interview with someone who's gonna give you the hardest time, right? Give you the most critical, difficult questions and preparing yourself to get to that point so that anything else underneath you're ready for.
Real world story, Luisa. I did an on-site interview and two of the interviewers on the panel definitely were role playing KOLs who had better things to do than listen to my presentation. This was on site, in person. I'm in the conference room. I'm up there presenting. I'm up there sharing some really insightful analogies, making the story relatable and translatable. But these two interviewers, wanted to be looking down at their phones and then giggling to each other. Fortunately, I had networked with an MSL at the company to give me some preliminary recon about the people who'd be there. And those people were identified as people that they're gonna push you either with questions or they're gonna see how you react with not paying attention. And I asked that MSL, what do you do in those situations? And they said, something that I do is while I'm presenting, I will walk and move so that I'm presenting right by those people, so that everybody's looking towards me, but they're looking through these people who are kind of being, mock rude. And the pressure of that will sometimes cause people to be self-aware and be like, oh, he's like talking right behind me now. So that I did that. I walked right by them and continued gracefully presenting the presentation, not phased whatsoever, not calling on them and being like, hey, is there something you want to discuss with the class? No, I just stood there and presented it, and they stopped talking. So ask mentors about what they do in those situations. And I can give you at least one real world example of that, where they may be trying to push you and agitate you to see, because there will be in the real world KOLs who do that. There will be KOLs who are checking their phone or eating their lunch buffet, and they're not paying attention to you. How are you going to react in this situation? Some companies, they have people who want to be a checks and balances to that to see how you react. Other companies, they may not. So you have to go in prepared for it.
No, thank you both. That's extremely insightful. I appreciate it.
If any of you can learn from, our past experiences and our mistakes. I see a lot of hands up. So whoever wants to go ahead, crack at it. Matthew, Ava.
Hey. Hey, my camera just turns off for whatever reason. So yeah, it turned off again. I don't really have control over that, but you can hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael and Simon, so much. This has been extremely helpful and so much new information for me. I'm actually, I'm an assistant professor, so I'm on the other side in academia. And so I don't actually know much about like the interview process and anything like that. So this is the first time I'm hearing more information besides the MSL Alliance training that I've been doing, because I do want to go into that direction. And so I'm just getting prepared right now. But do you think you can think of, I'm going to try the camera again so you can see me, but do you think you can think of the final interview kind of like, or the final presentation kind of like a chalk talk in academia, just that you are not, because in a chalk talk, you usually present what you want to do for a 10-year track lab, for instance, and you are most of the time like the expert, but this time you're not the expert. Can you think of it that way, like a little bit?
Well, it depends. If you get to choose your own topic, and if your topic that you choose is in the same therapeutic area, so if you're interviewing for a neuroscience MSL role and you can present on Parkinson's disease and how your research, what you've been doing in that, then you are the expert in that. So that shouldn't be the issue. But if you have to present on the company's slide deck, that's obviously a different story. You have to be prepared for these things also. Kind of connecting your question and Luisa's past question was like, are there things that the interviewing committee can do to agitate you? They definitely can not just like be texting or giggling to each other. They could also be interrupting your presentation with questions to see if you get phased by that, or if it, throws you off your game. You had a really eloquent introduction, but somebody just railroaded it with a question in the middle of the talk, and they want to see how you respond to it and if you're able to pick up momentum back into the presentation.
Yeah.
So you have to prepare.
Sorry, Mike. I
Go ahead,
have one who was like, okay, pretend I'm a history teacher. I have no idea about what the mechanism, like no idea about science. Tell me what the mechanism of this drug is. And then they kept probing me and getting to the point where they basically were trying to figure out, like, can you explain a highly difficult scientific concept in a really scientifically storytelling way?
Well, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
And Ava, you should know, as an MSL, whenever we're presenting, I came from academia, and it was a very stark contrast to how presentations are handled in academia versus when I'm the MSL. Like I said, in the real world, KOLs are like coming in the presentation to get their meal, they sit down, but then maybe they have to jet. And
Right.
it's chaos. It's not, and sometimes they're asking, because they're only there for the first 10 minutes of your talk, they want to ask their question. So it's not like, oh, a typical, I'm going to present through this topic from beginning to end, no interruptions. And then after this lecture, then you guys have an opportunity to ask questions. In the real world as an MSL, that's not how you're doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to give you a peek behind the curtain. All right. Derek and Matthew. I don't know if Derek, if your hand is up for a different question or if it's still up from the original question, but whoever wants to jump on.
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and ask briefly. So my current question here is kind of like prompted by a lot of the job postings I see on LinkedIn for MSL jobs. And I noticed that like the vast majority of them seem to be postings for mid to senior level MSLs, not so much for people who haven't broken into the role yet. So I'm kind of curious about, I guess generally speaking, if from the interviewer's perspective, like what do they really expect from someone who hasn't broken into the role yet in terms of just like, obviously strengths and weaknesses, experiences not had yet, and how someone who's maybe just coming out of graduate school can maybe anticipate how they're going to be probed for those weaknesses.
Yeah, the biggest one, the biggest issue in your candidacy if you're coming straight out of grad school, or you're coming into the MSL role with no past industry experience. You've never worked for pharma, you've never worked for biotech. It's, do you know the job? Do you know the job at a degree that's deeper than just the job description? Do you know these nuances? So if I ask you a hypothetical question about how you're going to be as the MSL and how you're going to approach building the territories in MSL, how do you intend on collaborating with your cross-functional colleagues? How do you intend to do that? If you can't answer these types of questions, you do not know the MSL role to a degree that warrants you to do the interview. That is your number one concern that you have to have. If you can't say, I'm the best person for this job, and you can't tell me what the job is and convince me that you know the MSL role, why would I ever give you the job if you don't know the role?
This is consistent feedback that we get from directors, senior directors, VPs who are called a part of these panel interviews. That's the number one thing that they're looking for. Does this person actually know what the MSL job is? And you'd be surprised at how many candidates who potentially, they start consulting services with us and they say, yeah, no, I have a pretty good understanding of what the MSL job is. And we'll throw a softball hypothetical question and they can't answer it, right? So you've got, and this is going to be the power of networking, right? So when you're networking with MSLs, I always say, like, you start with your tier ones, right? If you're brand new to this, what's your day in the life? What's an insight? What's this? As you build that knowledge base, then you just go up tiers and you go deeper and granular every single time you talk to the next MSL to really, really understand at a fundamental, like cellular biological level what they do.
Yes, that is your biggest thing.
I'll just interject quickly on a practical perspective of applying to jobs. I would say that very few, if any, postings are going to say no experience required. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of MSL jobs that say 2 years experience required, 1 to 2 years experience, and then you see those jobs that might say 5 years or more experience required. Those 5 years or more, those are going to be the jobs that are for senior MSLs, for experienced MSLs. I would pretty much in any case recommend not to spend your time applying to those. However, if there's positions that say 1 to 2 years, even if you don't have experience, those are still worth applying to, because again, a company is usually not going to say that they don't require any experience. And you never know, you might have a background that is very intriguing and very interesting to a company. So even though they're saying they require 2 years of experience, you might actually be a really good candidate for that role, even if it's your first MSL job. So I encourage you to apply to any job that you might think you'd be a good fit for and not get discouraged by it saying 2 years of experience required. but again, have a realistic understanding that if they're saying they want someone with 5 years, that's going to be a senior role.
Great advice, Lindsay. Great advice.
Thank you.
Do not let the job description is the company's ideal dating profile.
Yeah.
They have to, because they can control what they put on that job description. You're not going to set the bar low as the company. You're going to say, this is ideally who I'm looking to date. Like, boom, 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 down the criteria. So yeah, of course they're going to put out the ideal, but yeah, don't let that stop you unless it's for a senior MSL role. Yeah.
And through networking, you can find out what companies are more open to hiring first-time MSLs. Some companies don't really have the bandwidth to train new MSLs. Other companies really like to train new MSLs because they like to teach them their way of doing things. So again, with networking, that's a question that you can ask other MSLs. You know, what does it look like for hiring at your company? Are they open to new MSLs? What is the training process like? What is the onboarding process like? Those are all questions that you can use in your networking conversations.
There's so much luck that I'll say. There's a huge element of luck to getting your first role. One of the elements of luck is are you interviewing with a hiring manager who is open-minded to bring on a candidate, or who has a team that is so front-loaded with senior MSLs who are experienced that they can take a risk because they already have the infrastructure on their MSL team where they have mentors. They have people who've been doing the MSL role for 10 plus years who can mentor somebody who's brand new. All of these elements of luck come into play. But you need to know, as candidates who don't have any experience, it's not like you have nothing to offer versus somebody who's an experienced MSL. There's a lot of things that you can bring to the table that you have to convey in the interview and in the final presentation. One thing that separates you from possibly someone like me or somebody who has MSL experience is you have an insane drive and hunger to excel in this role. If you can show me that you have that drive by being the most well-prepared candidate when we hop on the interview, then that is something that conveys that this person, if I give them a shot, I have no question if they're not going to give it their all. I have no question. Versus somebody who's been in MSL for lots of years and they know how to put it on cruise control because they've been doing the job long enough. They know exactly what to do to just float right under the radar and not get, not experience any issues. You offer that as somebody. You have fresh energy and you have a drive and a commitment to get this job and to excel in it. Prove it to us. Prove it to the interview committee by showing them that you're better prepared than anybody else. All right. Derek, I think you're the last one with the hand up.
Last question.
All right.
Yeah, just kind of curious. It's kind of an interesting question. Something kind of I experienced with interviews. Is there anything during the interview process that you would consider like a red flag? Like maybe, ooh, this is probably not the type of company I want to work with or something? Because I know you guys talk about role playing and throwing a lot of hard questions. Anything that might pop up that tells you, ooh, maybe this is the type of work environment. Maybe it's a toxic work environment. Something that you experience that tells you, oh, maybe I don't want to work in this type of environment. Or you explain to a candidate that said, you told one of your clients that said, this might not be the type of positive or work environment that you might thrive in or might not be a good experience. Any red flags that you guys have experienced or seen any of that experience?
Yeah, I have a few. Simon, you want me to jump in first?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so something that I've seen as being in the industry for 6 years now, a big red flag is the product. Thinking about the product and is it actually novel? Or what barriers are there to accessing the product? Is the data great? Is it a Me Too drug where, it's just the same compound, only it's a pro-drug formulation of it? If there's something not really novel about the product or the science, that can mean that your quality of interactions in the field can be suffering because there's nothing really exciting for you to talk about from the company. Maybe you're looking at the company's press releases or their shareholder updates that they put out because it's a publicly traded company. If you're not seeing that they're investing in generating new evidence and information, you can really be stuck in a bad position as an MSL because you're supposed to be the conduit for all the innovation that's coming out of the company. What happens if the company's not innovating? You're going to keep bothering KOLs and telling them, well, I don't have anything new to share with you. I just wanted to catch up on how vacation was. That can be not fun because you have no ammunition that the company is generating that you can be out there having high-level conversations. The other red flag is, what is the relationship between medical affairs leadership? Like, I'm talking like as it's going up to like C-suite, CMO level, or down maybe one tier down to VP level. What is the relationship between leadership in the company and the field medical team? What does that dynamic look like? Is leadership who's making decisions about how MSLs do our job, do they have any clue about the value that we actually provide? Or do they have no idea and they're having you chase shiny objects that have no substance whatsoever or no impact whatsoever, but that's going to be how you're assessed on your year-end performance. So if there's a dissonance between the leadership who's making decisions and they have a dissonance with what we as MSLs are capable of doing in a territory, that can dictate a lot of your quality of life, where that could be a bad work environment. Because you're an MSL, all the orders are going to trickle down to you. Yes, it's a very awesome position to be in, but in the hierarchy of pharma, you're still like not like high on the totem pole. So you're going to get marching orders. You're going to get, these are your year's objectives. That can dictate your quality of life. Science.
And I think a lot of the questions and red flags from a company you're thinking about, we can't think about, we don't know all the red flags, right? It's very company specific. So that's why it's important to be networking with MSLs, right? So maybe if you've got that network of people you've reached out to in the past, you've built, a relationship with them, and maybe you notice, right? Let's say you're potentially applying for a company, and one of those people that you've previously talked to has experience working at that company. You can reach out to them. This is, you can also get a lot of insights about company culture from your interviews or from your networking opportunities with MSLs within that company. A lot of times you can get a lot from just tone, right? So let's say you reach out to an MSL who's at the company and you're like, hey, I'm really excited about, being an MSL. I'd love to hear about, what your company's like and all that stuff. And if they themselves are like, well, things are great, but there's some challenges been going on. I mean, MSLs, if you can build a relationship with them, they'll be pretty candid as well. So these are the types of questions and strategies you've got to be looking for.
I also feel like we have to say this. Getting your first role is by far the hardest challenge. I would not be picky if I were any of you. You know why? Because nothing is permanent. The company can lay you off. The company can restructure and cut you at a moment's notice. Nothing has to be permanent. That's different advice than our parents' generation of like, they were working at the same company for like 30 years, and it was all because they shook hands, and sealed the deal. It's different in our generation. You do it. I would accept any company that's willing to take a chance on you for your first MSL role. If you find out the work culture is not great, then take your talents elsewhere, because now you officially have an MSL title that you can put on your CV.
And I think this is important because especially it sounds like from a pharmacist, kind of like a clinical perspective, I feel like a lot of pharmacists and clinicians, we look for that stability a lot of times. Like that's kind of, and I mean, I would say for PhD as well, right? Like we got into our professions because we were told growing up that once you get your license, you're set. You're gonna have a stable job, 9 to 5. You're gonna never worry about lost income or anything like that. You got to put that down. Industry is just very dynamic. It's different. But again, there's a risk reward scale to this job. And ultimately, I can probably speak for all the MSLs on this call that the risk is definitely worth the reward, right?
Yes, 100%. 100%.
All right. Well, I think, could stay on for hours and ask questions, but we got to cut it off at some point, right? So I'd like to, again, just say a very genuine thank you to Simon and Mike. They give us so much of their time, really great insights. We're happy to have you back anytime on the webinar. But for everybody, we did record this session, so I will get it up on the YouTube channel if you want to rewatch parts of it. We covered a lot today. So just be on the lookout for that. Definitely check out Breakthrough MSL on the Instagram page. You can ask them if you have more specific questions about it.
Yep.
But with that, yeah, I'd just like to thank everybody. Everybody stay in touch, keep connected on LinkedIn. And until the next webinar.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay, for having us on.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you,
It was
all.
fantastic. Y'all have a great weekend.
Thanks for the great questions, y'all. Have fun this weekend.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye.